Hey, my name is Simeon. I'm with the KC7 Foundation. I'm joined with Wayman today, and we're going to be walking you through the recent scenario that we did at our Saturday event with Dai Wok Foods. And here we just wanted to have a casual chat and show you how the approaches that we take to investigating uh, the data, how we go about our pivots, how we ask questions, um, and generally how, without any guided questions, we can figure out how to find out more information about suspicious activity or how we can take an indicator and use it to unravel a greater cluster. Thanks for joining me today, Wayman.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here.
So our starting point, of course, you can go to our website at kc7cyber.com/modules. And Dai Wok Foods is one of the available modules that we have here. We give you all the different materials you actually need to uh, run the session. So we'll give you access to the data on Azure Data Explorer. We'll give you access to the different questions that guide you through the scenario on our scoreboard. And finally, we'll give you access to the event guide, which teaches you how do you run basic KQL queries and how do you, start to ask certain questions to find out more about the data. Today, we're not going to go through the questions that we've provided on the scoreboard. Instead, we're going to just take a more free approach to doing an investigation just to see what it's like when we do this in real life. So I'll hand it over to Women to maybe give us an introduction to maybe the scenario and what we're going to be investigating today.
Yeah, definitely. So Dai Wok Foods is this huge restaurant conglomerate that owns a large number of restaurants all around the US, all around the world. Essentially, they have a huge number of brands of restaurants that operate under the Dai Wok Foods umbrella. As the player, start off as a security operations center or SOC analyst at this company. And your job is to identify and look for any threats that are related or that are associated with this company. One thing that's pretty interesting or that you start off with in the beginning is that they believe that they may have been hit or impacted by some sort of attack. And they think it had to do with a slew of food poisoning emails that were sent to a bunch of their restaurants. IT management and other upper level management folks at Dai Wok Foods determined that a possible employee may have been impacted, and her name is Delphia Evans. So just using that as a starting point, we kind of go off and investigate on our own. And the way we do that is we use Azure Data Explorer, which is put up by KC7. This is kind of the main, if you haven't seen it before, this is kind of the main site that we use to explore and investigate data that's generated by KC7.
Awesome. And for those who've never played with one of our modules before, essentially, we provide all the different audit logs that Dai Wok Food collects inside of a database for you. And so if you look on the left-hand side right here, we have 9 different security logs that represent, different points of visibility that Dai Wok Foods have. And, you can kind of think about them as security cameras, right? Each of them is looking at a different perspective on the incident or the intrusion. And it's your job as an analyst to really, take all these different log sources that view the thing that happened from a different perspective and correlate them together to tell the full story about what exactly happened. So, wait a minute, where are we going to start today?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, before I start my investigation, I want to make sure that I have kind of the tools that I need to start. And one of them is making sure I have a good documentation platform. So, people do it different ways. People have Word documents, people have notes. I like using mind maps. So one of the tools that I use is XMind. And I kind of pre-populated some stuff here to start my investigation. But as you mentioned, right, I have these data sources that I've written out just so that I know which ones I can look at when I'm looking at this very specific scenario, looking at this very specific event where management has told me to look into an employee. I'm going to write that down just so I don't forget. So I could say like Dai Wok Foods, sorry, management informed the SOC analyst that Sophia Evans may have been impacted by the computer attack. So I'll start off with something like this so I can get context. I can figure out, where to look at. And if I ever, move on and do my investigation and I forget like how this all started, I can go back to this and look at that. So one of the things we want to do, right, is learn more about this employee. You know, even as a SOC analyst, even as an IT person, if you work for a very large company, you're not going to know everybody. And then outside of that, outside of just knowing the person themselves, knowing what their role is in the company, what devices and things that they use is important because if they're targeted, if they're hit by a threat actor or adversary and they were compromised, you want to track the devices that are in use by that employee because that's most likely where the threat actor is going to be. And those are where you'll find the little, breadcrumbs and footprints related to the threat actor.
Yeah, that's a very good, important point. Because different employees generally have different accesses and have different access to information. And depending on who might get compromised or who gets compromised, it poses a different level of risk to the company. So if an IT, employee gets compromised, for example, right, they may have access to, uh, production systems, right, or the code base, or they may have admin access to various servers that the adversary can use to move laterally. Or if the CEO gets compromised, they may have critical business documents on their machine. So always good to know who the employee is, and what are the different attributes that we can find out about them that we can use to support our investigation.
Yeah, that was well said. Yeah, it's perfect because you know threat actors don't usually stay on one employee as well. They tend to move around. They tend to go and find that access. And you mentioned IT roles; those are very lucrative. Right, to get administrative access. Executives are very crucial because they have very sensitive information that they can extort or share. So one of the things we'll start off now then is using the employees table, which contains, and I opened it a little bit here so you can see it contains information about employees at Dai Wok Foods. It contains several information. You have their name, user agent, which we can go into a little bit later, but we have IP addresses, email addresses, their username and their role. So we see here a lot of employees with a wide variety of roles as well as their host name, which is mapped to the actual computer that they're using within the company. So, back to our mind map, right? They mentioned an employee named Delphia Evans may have been impacted by the computer attack. I don't know anything about the username. I don't know their email address or anything else. So let's go and try to find that ourselves. Management is very busy, so we can't always rely on them to give us all the information. We have to go out and actively seek that information. A
Yeah,
lot of times in our job, right, no one's gonna tell you every single thing. Your job is to pull on these threads and pieces and figure that out yourself.
awesome.
So what I'll do is I'll query for the name, right? That's the name that I do have. It's Delphia Evans. So I will go and search for her. And then running that, I do get an entry for Delphia Evans. Things that I'll map. So let's see here. There's the IP address, which relates to her internal or source IP address related to her machine. You have her email address, you have her username and her role, as well as the host name. So here we identified the role as restaurant staff. So that means Delphia works at a restaurant under Dai Wok Foods. And determining her access is different than let's say like an IT manager or CEO. However, I mean every single role is still a risk, right? It doesn't matter if they're a restaurant staff or an IT manager. A compromise is still a compromise, and that's something definitely worth exploring.
Yeah. And when not, as I'm looking at some of these fields that are in this table, I'm thinking about how we can use the different bits of information we found out about Delphia and how we can find those bits of information in the different log sources. For example, we see an IP address here, right? Maybe we can find that in the emails table. Maybe we can see what email she received or if she received a malicious email address. I see an IP address. I'm thinking automatically about, what websites did she browse to in the outbound network events. I'm thinking about uh, her username, right? Can we find out
Yep.
anything about, authentications to her email address, or can we find out more about things that happened on her machine? So maybe it'll be useful to, note some of these details that we can reuse for later.
Yep, that's you perfectly said that because we're looking at all of the information related to her, and these bits and pieces align with all of the different tables that we have access to, but they're not like one-to-one mapping, right? You need to look at some of these tables and identify which pieces of this information related to Delphia can be found in there. So I like to log all of this information. You can do comments. So it's two forward slashes. Well, let me just do that here. And roll. So a lot of times, and I can go back and do this later, I'll take this information and I'll put it into my mind map. Actually, I can do that right now. It'll be really quick. Whoops. I'll put it in there just so that I have that information in the future, so I don't have to, um,
Awesome.
go back and query it again on KC7 on the data. But moving from there, there's a lot of paths you can take. So I generally like to go for the low hanging fruit. So, I can look at all the emails related to Delphi Evans. I can look at all of the, file creation events or things that happen on her device for that machine. Or I can go through a whole slew of number of these. But what you want to look for is things that are easy to move or pivot off of,
Yeah,
things that are like suspicious, things that, might give you a good anchor. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck kind of in a rabbit hole, constantly looking at these things and you might spend a lot of time on something that may not be as fruitful.
right.
So part of the process is figuring out where to start first.
Yeah. So it's always important to, as opposed to kind of diving in and not really knowing, it's better to have a strategy for, how you're going to find the badness, right? Because they just said it was badness, but they didn't necessarily say what. So what would you suggest we look at first instead?
Yeah, so I would generally look at security alerts first, right? Security alerts, this table relates to kind of things that are flagged by our security systems that are in place at Dai Wok Foods. So typically, there's a wide array of events that would alert here on security alerts. And let me just open up the table so we can take a look. Typically, you'll see something like the time that the event occurred, the host, like whether it's a host or email alert, if there's a severity level associated with it, and then some general information. These are good things to pivot off of first because they're already flagged as bad, right? So um, one thing to
Yeah,
note though, this may not always be, you know, bad. There's a lot of false positives. Tweakings of rules and things make it it could be finicky depending on how the system is implemented.
I mean, you said that you brought up the term false positive. Can you explain what a false positive is?
Yeah, certainly. So in terms of alerting, there's multiple results. You have like a true positive, which means that it is concretely and identified as malicious or suspicious activity in this context. You have a false positive where maybe it alerted and said that it's suspicious or positive, but when you do a further investigation, you find that it is benign. It's a course of like regular computer or security thing. instead of you know an actual malicious activity. And a
Yeah.
lot of times that fires off when the alerts or rules are not tuned correctly for a security product. So you have that, and then you have like a true negative, which is something that's concretely defined as normal behavior, normal activity, and not suspicious. And you also have false negatives, which are things that they flag as good to go, or normal behavior, but are actually malicious. So
Yeah.
uh,
And I
yeah.
imagine as a security analyst, it would be very annoying if you're on the job all the time and all the alerts that you're working are false positives. So you go down a rabbit hole, you get an investigation, you get a lead to investigate, you spend, a couple hours working on it, and all of a sudden it's just uh some IT admin somewhere doing something benign, or it's just some legitimate process that got alerted on. Um, so the trick is always to figure out, as an analyst, right? Well, you want to work every single thing that gets alerted based on, however your team decides that they're going to prioritize alerts, but you want to figure out how to work more true positives as opposed to false positives, lest you burn out.
Yes, yes, that's completely correct. And a lot of times too, when you find evidence of suspicious behavior, things that are actually not tracked on the security alert system, it's always worth it to share with your IT person, or the person who's implementing these alerts and rules, because it can better help define them in the future. So that's always something to be cognizant about, things to take into play. Like, if something you find is malicious but it's not being alerted on, definitely share that with the rest of your team. Obviously it's a team game. You have folks at your company who'd be willing to, take the information that you're finding and be able to implement it to better protect your company.
Awesome. All right, so we're looking at security alerts, but the original thing we wanted to find was suspicious activity related to our user Delphia Evans. So,
Yep.
if I'm looking for all these, how do I figure out like what is actually here related to Delphia?
Yeah, so you want to take some of this information and, if I'm going in blind and I don't know what is being hit on, I can look at some of the information already on the security alerts, right? If I'm this one, I just did the whole thing, but if I do just like a take, if I take the first 50 and I look at the description of each one, I could see that they're talking about a host. So this type of alert, the host alert, talks about a host machine. So I can take this and take a look at that on the security alerts. So one thing I can do is try that, right? So if I do where description, and I see that it has, the host name machine, I'm going to put that in there as well. So going off on this, and I search all across all of my alerts. I didn't get one. So that's fine. What I'm going to do now is take a look at what other alerts there are. So these are all hosts. If I change my alert type, so if I know that the host alert type isn't showing up for Delphia Evans, I can do setting a not equal to host, right? So now I have email ones. And actually, we only have a very few amount here, so I can kind of take a look. And I already see one that I remember because I had looked up Delphia Evans' username recently. But if you have a large number of email alerts, you can do it this way, where you get rid of the host alert and then just search again, right? The description with the employee D E Evans as the username, and you should be able to hit the same entry here.
All right, now we're actually cooking with fire, right? So now we have an
Yeah.
alert, suspicious alert that actually is related to Delphia Evans. So what is this telling us?
Yeah, so it's saying that the employee, Delphia Evans, reported a suspicious email with the subject, and it looks like it's an external email based off the tag, formal action on food poisoning, which kind of tracks with, the narrative that the IT manager and other management folks were telling you, that, this all started when they started getting these food poisoning orders. And if you look at some of these other alerts, right, you see kind of the same thing. You see some of these other bad food poisoning letters, customer complaints, And then some of these other ones that might be relevant, but you see there's a good chunk of food poisoning related emails here. So that tells you that this is something you should maybe look into, especially for the employee itself, right? So a lot of times what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the timestamp from when they reported it, because that's kind of my starting point. That's the point in time that I want to look at. And you can see here, it's one of the earlier emails as well. So you want to get back to the starting point. You want to try to find patient zero, try to find the initial point of compromise. So go
So
ahead.
how can we find out more information about this email that Delphia reported?
Yeah. So I'm just gonna update my map really quick on the timestamp. Oops. And put the alert so that I don't forget what it looks like. So when I look at this, right, what I can do two things. I can look around the same time frame for the emails, but since we're lucky and we had the alert actually fire on the subject of the email, right, you see this external formal action on food poisoning, I can actually copy that and search in my email tables for that email itself. So moving off from this, if I do email, and let's just do a take 10 to see what type of information we have here. We have, the timestamp from when the email was sent or received. You have the sender, the reply to, the recipient, and the subject. And then you have a link that's related, that's embedded within the email itself. So I can take the subject, right, in this field and search for that. So doing this search should yield me some results. And let's see if Delphia is in here. And she is, right? You see this
Yeah.
right here. And look at the time though. It was sent on April 2nd, although the alert itself, I gotta go back to my map, but I can just do it here. You could see that it was alerted on April 4th. That's when the employee reported it.
Okay.
So taking that into consideration, tells me that the employee may not have looked at the email until 2 days later. But regardless of that, let's take a look for Delphia Evans specifically. If you look through this, you see, it looks like the same subject. That's weird that some of them were suspicious or blocked, but some of them are clean as well. This could be again like a false negative, right?
Right.
As we look on the link here, we see some additional files that may be associated with this email. So what I'm going to do, and I know this is kind of painful, but I like mapping this stuff as we go. So email. If I do this, it helps me build a story later. And I'm just going to do Delphia Evans first versus the other ones, right? I'm going to take.
Yeah, and I love the way you map it out. So then we don't, it's so easy to forget what you've done before. You're like, hey, like when was that email sent again? Or what am I working with?
Yeah.
Building it with the mind map, you have, automatically so many different points that you can pivot on. And you're really building the story of the investigation as you go through. And so if someone in management comes along and say, hey, like, what do you know about this investigation? Or someone else wants to take over your investigation, you have a clear story of what you've seen so far, what you know, as well as what you don't know. And you can clearly pick one of these points as a pivot point to go find out more information.
Yeah, totally. So I mapped out, right, just Delphia Evans's her activity, her email specifically. But what I did see is there's other emails here that were flagged. Actually, I counted wrong, but there's five emails total. One of them being Delphia. That means there's 4 other employees that potentially got sent the same email, and those are actually different avenues to search for. Right? If I put these four, this is another adventure, so to speak, that I can take. I can look at these other four employees first, or choose that path, or I could say, I can tell my team, I'm looking at Delphia Evans. Here I found four other employees that may have been impacted. Can one of you guys take a look at an employee, at each one of these employees? So it's a really good divide and conquer scenario here.
Yeah, because I imagine for each one of these, we want to know, did they click an email? Was there any post-compromise activity that actually followed on? So there's an entire trail thing that we can investigate afterwards. So that's a really good point there.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple of things you can do from here now. You can look, for example, this file, this lawsuit.xlss. You can look for it on Delphia Evans' computer. You can look at the outbound network events, which is the table that contains kind of the web traffic that employees at Dai Wok Foods take. So you can see the types of websites they access, etc. Since you have a link, you can take that and see if Delphi Evans had actually clicked on the link as well. We can try the link one because I think to me I want to have that confirmation to see if she'd actually clicked on it, because when you do like host-based investigations, or when you start looking at actual computers, the files, like think about how many files there are on a computer, right? It's a lot of work. So
Yeah,
to the extent where I can limit that, I will do that.
that's a
So if I do, or go ahead, sorry.
that's a great approach. We also want to know, like, is there actually an impact to the organization, or what happens after, if she happened to have clicked it, what would happen afterwards?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm moving on now, right, to the outbound network events table. I'm doing a take 10 to see what type of data is available to me. Again, you typically have your timestamp, you have the type of method, source IP. To me, these look like internal IP addresses. So they tell me that if I take this IP, I can map it back to an employee. You have user agents and the URL. So before I even move on to the link, I want to make sure that I even have data for Delphia Evans, right? So if I take her IP address and I do, where source IP equals to her IP. So I see there's 71 records. So, okay, so I have data. I can kind of scroll around to look at it, but, there are 71 records. And then sometimes if you have longer retention periods, you may have hundreds, thousands, right? Think about how often an employee, browses the internet.
Yeah, so each one
So
of these records represent, Delphia Evans clicked on a link while she was browsing at work. So she, visited 71 websites, or she made 71 web requests over the course of that period. Which of course, since this is a simulation, the data set is a little bit smaller than you might find in real life, right? Like you said, in real life, you might find like hundreds of thousands of these or millions of these, websites that an employee might have visited over a certain time frame. And that might be unmanageable, right? You might spend hours trying to investigate that, as opposed to maybe sharpening in what you're investigating.
yeah, definitely. So, you know, as we see here that she has visited URLs in the past, we can go ahead now and search for that URL from the email. So it looks like she didn't click on the link, at least from what we see in the data, right?
Right. Uh,
So
can we
yeah,
see if anyone else clicked on the link? I think here you're focusing on exactly to see if she visited the link in
yes,
particular, since she put her
yep,
source IP address.
yep, yeah, that's definitely. So I mean, we ran this thing for Delphia Evans now. So what I can do is, put into the alert that, Delphia appears to not have clicked on the link. Right. But the great thing about what I did the search earlier, right, is that there's other employees that may have been impacted. So you're right. If I now search across just the link itself, I can see if anyone else clicked on this link, and nobody else did. So employees, appeared not to have clicked on the link.
Well, on that particular link, but if I recall correctly, there are multiple links presented with that subject, because our initial pivot was on the subject of the email.
Yep, that's exactly right. So this is kind of the case where we run a lead to the ground. We found something, but now, right, we have other avenues to take. You have all of these other links here. Before me just typing each one of these separately, I will just take that and do something cool with KQL and just do a let statement. But in order to format that, I want to make sure I know what I want. So essentially, I want to take all of these distinct links. Then I want to go and search that across the outbound network events to see if anybody had clicked on that. So if I do this and I set this information into a variable that I call links, I can now go to outbound network events and do, where the URL is in the links. We still don't have anything here, right?
Oh
That's
man.
okay
Well, that's good
because,
news for us, right?
yeah. So this tells us, other employees did not click on the link. Now we can move a little bit. We can get a little bit more creative with this.
But wait a minute, doesn't that mean that we're all scot-free? I mean, we saw a bunch of emails that were related to the initial alert. We found the links that were in those emails. No one clicked the link. Can we just wrap up the alert and call it a day, tell management there was no impact?
Not quite, right? If there's still activity going on and you still see all of these, if the company is still impacted, just because you ran this specific thing down doesn't mean that, the that attack's over. Just because you can't find something, right, doesn't mean that there's no activity going on in the background. And it's an important thing to note because you want to have that lens where you're always looking for ways to be creative about finding activity if there is. If you have reported activity that there was either an attack or an intrusion, but they don't know how or what happened, that's something you still need to follow up and check. It doesn't matter if this results in nothing, right? There's a lot of different avenues you can take, and maybe just here maybe we just don't have the visibility, or maybe it went through and it wasn't logged, right?
Right.
We still need to do our kind of investigations here.
Awesome. And that's why I really like the mind map that you're using, because I think we can go back and say, well, we didn't find anything in the branch of activity that we're searching, but maybe we can go back up a level and say, okay, well, what other leads do we have that we can chase here?
Yeah. So another lead that I like to do, and I'm going to start on this here, right, is take the kind of files that were being served, that were being put in these emails. So if I go back to this email where subject has food poisoning, right, I see there's a couple of files here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make, kind of a list of this. So I see a lawsuit.xlss. I see, formal complaint.xlss and large order, right?
Yeah. Do we
So
want to take
now,
a moment maybe and look at all the other things that maybe we can pivot on while we're here?
yeah, of course. Do you mean like in this table or?
Yeah, so we can make a list of like what are all the different things that we can go back and pivot on later. Because, maybe
Yeah.
there's a couple of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
see a sender from my perspective. We can
Yep.
pivot on a sender, which may or may not be unique to the adversary, but it's worth noting that this is a something that we can pivot on. So we have
Mm-hmm.
county.county@yahoo.com and
Yep.
county@gmail.com. And we don't have to like investigate them all at once, but maybe make that list of things that we have the ability to pivot on later. And then if we don't have luck with the file names above, we can go back and kind of go down our list of like investigative leads until we exhaust them.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that you brought that up because that's definitely things that we want to take a look at. So you're right. The sender and the reply to are definitely very key pieces of information to search, because then you're going to surface, other employees that may have been sent this email. You can see what type of links and activities they've sent, and then you have, of course, the subject we've already done, the recipients. You can also if you could take the list of recipients and see if they were sent other similar emails.
Around the
But
time, yeah.
yeah, that would take a little bit more resource intensive type stuff there. Same thing for some of the links, right? We already exhausted these links, but
And inside the
maybe
links, I think we see domains, right? And
Mhm.
those domains look a little bit suspicious. So we might think, okay, well, are these domains actually like legitimate domains that the files are being served on, or are these like actor controlled domains that they registered that maybe we can pivot on and find additional activity?
Exactly. Because, right, as you map these out, you have all of these different domains that are other avenues of investigation. So, um, as you see here, there's so many paths and possibilities you can take. I am choosing a different one, but as you brought this all up, maybe it's going to make me change my mind on what I want to look at first.
Yeah. But again, like
So
some of that is discretion of the analyst,
yeah,
which route you want to take.
so if I do like leads, right, I can check files I can look at. I have senders. So I can think of two things that I can do, um, or that I'd like to do. And if I hit a wall on any of these, then I can go and pivot off of. But I think maybe I can do the emails first. Let's see how much we can get. And if we get a lot, then we can move back to files and domains. But I think we're gonna get, fingers crossed into the same spots.
All right, let's do it.
So if we go back to, I'm gonna take my query and I'm gonna move it again. And now what I want is, let's do the senders, right? So if I do distinct senders, there's two of them. I could do a where statement for the two, but I'm just going to do another let statement because it's easier for me. If I do if I do where the sender is in these emails, I'm going to have a lot more.
Oh,
So let's see.
wow.
Yeah, there's 30.
I thought we were done with the investigation, but it looks like there's a lot more activity that we might have missed.
Yep. So now we've had 5 recipients, right? If we were just do a quick check, how many Dai Wok Food recipients? So now instead of the 4 to 5 employees, we have 30 employees that we have to investigate.
Yeah. But
And you
wait
can,
a second, wait a minute.
yeah,
So we looked at the senders for those email addresses, right? And we pivoted on those and we
yeah.
found more activity. Does that necessarily mean that this activity is bad? Like, how do we know this activity is actually bad?
So we don't yet, right? All the time you have to look with kind of like a kind of a skeptical lens, right? Just because somebody told you that they were sent a food poisoning email that might have occurred, that might have started the whole thing. You always want to take that with a grain of salt because you have to verify that information yourself. And just because these are external emails, yes, it does lend a bit more, suspiciousness to see that these like Gmail accounts or Yahoo, like, non-corporate accounts are sending emails to employees. We still have to go through the process to determine, if it's malicious or not.
Yeah. But, if we scroll over to the right, we can maybe like look at the subjects and the links to see if there's any patterns perhaps that we can track that can give us maybe an analyst intuition over, whether or not this is a good path to go down.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really good insight there, right? Now you're looking at just the subjects, and if you sort by just looking at the subjects here, there's a whole slew of the emails here that are related to food poisoning. Um, very, very interesting indeed. If I look at these, right, you know, if I'm putting my thinking hat on, if I was doing kind of these actual emails, if I was actually complaining about food poisoning, I would probably send it to like a help desk or support email, not directly to employees at a company.
Right.
So this makes me think it moves up my suspicious meter here.
Yeah. And what about the links? Like if I'm sending emails about food poisoning, like What, why, like, what are these different type of files that I'm attaching? Like, is that, I mean, the domains seem to have a certain pattern to,
Mhm.
and they're not, consistent at all.
Yeah, so if you're a brand new SOC analyst and you don't have experience with these types of files that are being displayed here on these links, you may not be familiar with it. But XLSX is related to a Microsoft Excel document. You have DocX, which is related to a Word document. You have PDFs, as well as link files, LNK files. Essentially, when you're looking at these different files, if they were sharing some information, maybe they would put that in the email itself. But since you have these, one thing to note is that in phishing emails, there's a lot of threat actors like to entice you to open up a file, especially these types of files, because for Word or Excel, like these types of documents contain what are called macros, and a lot of times it's a piece of code that's within these documents that if the user enables it, it actually injects a piece of code and exploits that computer to the point where they're compromised.
Awesome.
So thank you, yeah, for bringing that up. I mean, that also increases my suspicious meter, right?
Yeah.
So the avenue you can take here, you can do the long route of looking at the recipients to investigate what else happened to them. You can continue with the reply to as well. But let's try what we just did before with the links, right? If we take the distinct links here, I have about 14 URLs I can search. Now let's go see if anybody clicked on that. So one thing that's really cool is that you can do another let statement and have that set for you. Now I can do the same thing I did, right, where the URL is in the links. Still nothing. So what does this tell us? That, potentially all of these emails were sent, but none of them were clicked. There's a important distinction to note here. So if I do sender links, did not yield results.
Man, it looks like our users must have gotten really good awareness training or something.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them, didn't click on the link, which was really good. It's a win in my book. So different avenues here. I'm going to move just a little bit quicker just to get things going, right? What I'm going to see now is if I go back to, whoops, if I go back to the emails that I found previously, I'm going to leave this here just for later. But if I do, for example, back to where I was and the 30, one thing I'm going to see here is the reply to emails are different, right? And I don't think in my list here, because I only had 2 emails, if I recall, and I can quickly check that, right? I had these, oh, I had 3. So let me see 1,000 in
Right,
here.
but we didn't include it because we only did a distinct on the senders.
Yep. So I think this one was a reply to actually. So see, it's good to keep notes.
Yeah.
But outside of that, right, if I had these two and I had that on my map, I'm actually gonna change this really quick. Right, so I've done the senders. I have not done the reply to fields. I think it's time for us to do that
Okay.
because this is a relatively quick search, right? I can do that pretty quickly here. If I do like the distinct reply to now, I'll have a good number of emails here. There's 5. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do a reply to, then I'm going to check where the reply to is in. And this one gives us even more results now. We have 64. That's quite a bit. And I think we're going to have a lot more links. So we
30
have
links.
31.
Oh man,
Yeah.
uh, I thought the investigation was over a long time ago. That's uh, that's not
Yep.
good.
So what we see here, right? Last one we had, I didn't document this, but we had 14. Then now we have 31. What I'm going to do is take and do the exact same thing I just did, but now with the 31 emails. And there we go. So now we found a link that was clicked, and it was clicked on April 3rd by this source IP, which belongs to a user that we'll take a look at later. And they clicked on this URL. So going back to my map, you know, I can pull the list of everything that I had, but I'm going to go back and revise this later. I'm just going to make a quick note right now, right? Reply to hit on a, and part of the thing is like the whole map doesn't have to be complete as you're doing this. I think, you can take some quick notes because otherwise you're going to be stuck doing a whole
Document.
bunch of
Yeah.
stuff. And yeah, so you don't want to be bogged down by documentation, but you do want to document because it'll be important to search on in the future. So now, right, the center links didn't yield me any results, but the reply to hit on a URL that's clicked by employee. We'll just make a note here. You search for all reply tos. So that when I go back to my query, I can know where I'm supposed to go. So now I have these three. And this relates to employee, right? So
Yeah.
now, again, I'm going to go back and figure out who that employee is. So I'm going to do employees where IP address equals this. So now we've gone to an employee named John Garcia.
Was that one of the employees we got an alert for?
I don't think so, but we can quickly check once we have all this information really quick. If I do, John Garcia, we have the IP. Let's do the email address and username.
I think if you scroll over to the left, Wayman, and you click on the
Which part?
all the way to the left, and
Yep.
click on that little caret right
Oh,
next
this.
to the timestamp. Yeah, it will
Yep.
actually expand it into JSON
Oh,
form.
nice. That's I didn't know that. So that'll be a lot easier for me to
Little
copy.
trick. Yeah.
So actually, if I'm going to take that and I'm just going to put that in here, right? Perfect. So I learned something new just from being on this stream with you. So
Yeah.
once I have this here, right, let's go ahead and actually look if it ever had an alert on this employee. So if I do security alerts, we know that the email was based off of the username. So let's try the username here. No hits.
No hits, no security alerts. So
Yeah,
we
what
would
about
have
the
found this
host?
via alerts.
No alerts on there either. That's very interesting here. Right, so this is again a potential false negative, right? There might be some things going on here that we don't see that we'll need to warrant further and take a look. So back to the link that was clicked, and I'm going to use your um, life hack here to get this information because I was typing it very slow. If I take that and I look at different ways that I can move on next, I think the biggest thing I want to look at is this file, right? Is this file present and can I find it in John Garcia's computer? So if I go back to my file events, right, I have this information and we can move on to this and see what else we can do from here.
All right. So this is our starting point here.
Yep. So I have a large order.xlsx. So if I do file creation events, and I'm going to set it by the host name, which we had already gone for John Garcia, which is this laptop device here. If I take a look, sometimes this would actually run quite a lot. But if I do like a small take 10, I can take a look at, the different files that are on here. Before I move on though, oh, well, I already found it, right? If I
Good here.
didn't, yeah, if I didn't know that I got lucky with these records, I would just search for the file name, right? So
Nice.
here we have all of this. So it looks like they're using Chrome and they clicked on, or this file was created on their device at around April 3rd. So again, can I just click this? Will it copy the whole thing?
I have no idea. We could try it.
Nope,
No.
that's okay. If I take all of this information, I'm just gonna log it so I can see it here. Right, now we have the file. There's a couple things we can do here. We can look at the hash itself. We have a lot of different tools to see.
And really quickly, Wayman,
Yeah,
what is the hash?
yeah. So the hash, there's a lot of ways to explain it, but essentially what it is, in kind of like you know context terms, is that it's like a digital fingerprint of sorts for a file. So
Yeah,
when you're looking at a file, there's a way to represent it in alphanumeric characters, which is what you see here in this hash. These are done through a bunch of different what's called hashing algorithms, where it takes a piece of data and it runs it through an algorithm to create a set of characters like this that uniquely represent that file. And
right.
what I mean by that is that we have this file called largeorder.xlsx. I can change the name of it to just order.xlsx, but the content, right, the actual things that are within that Excel file stay the same.
Yeah,
The hash is not going to change. If I add a space, if I add a period, or add anything into the file and save it, this whole hash is going to be completely different. So this is a really good thing to track in cybersecurity, because you can take that information and identify if it moved again, right, across your company. You can look up through different tools to determine if the file itself is malicious or not, if other people have reported it malicious or not.
yeah. Okay, thanks for that explanation. All right, so where are we looking for the hash? Where can we find the hash?
Yeah, so I can search it across different hosts, but one thing I like to do first is to see, like, is this even a bad hash, or is this a bad hash that it's already been reported on,
Yeah,
right? So if I go to virustotal.com, which is a website that's allows you to search domains, IP addresses, and hashes to see if it's been submitted before, if it's been reported publicly. But when you submit a file onto VirusTotal, it'll actually scan it using a wide array of antivirus engines to tell you if it's bad or not. Again, right, you still have to think about whether it's a false positive, a true positive, etc. A lot of times too, right? Hackers are really sneaky, and they can evade all of these antivirus engines, and it could say that it's clean, but it's actually malicious.
right.
So if I search for this, I don't get any matches. It doesn't mean that it's bad or it's good or anything. It just means that VirusTotal doesn't have it. And a lot
Yeah,
of times that means that you have to voluntarily upload the file, right? Um, from an OPSEC perspective, and just being sensitive about your company's information, you could theoretically take the file and upload it, but I probably would advise against it, because you might tip your attackers, you might tip the media, etc., about a potential compromise, and you don't want that negative press. So outside of that now, right, we see a large order file that was sent around this time. And now there's a couple avenues you can take. I will go kind of differently. I think some folks might take this logical step, but I know others may take different paths as well. So one of the things that I like to move on to is what are called process events. So when you talk about process events and you have, and let's just do a take 10 to see.
Yeah.
You have running services, running programs, running things that are going on for a machine. You have like a command line argument. So like anything that was put after like to run with the file. And then you have, the process name hash, you have the host name, some of the usernames that are associated. Sometimes you'll see system because it's a system level process versus a user running it, right?
Yeah. And that's a great idea looking at processes because we want to find like what actually happened in the machine. Before we do that though, I'm really curious, Wayman, like is there anything else that happened on that machine like around the time that I think we found it, but I'm curious just before we start investigating processes, I just want to get a
Yeah.
good idea of like what other files might have been like written before or after, just so we get an idea of what's happening in the user's box that we might need to be aware of before we start looking into processes.
Yeah. So that's perfect because there's multiple ways to go about this. And if I take the time from when this file was created, I can take a look both on file creation events or process events for times that occur between the two.
Right.
So follow your path, right, where you want to look at um, the times that occurred on this machine. What I'm going to do first, right, I'm going to set it to this user, John Garcia. I'm going to take the timestamp, but I'm going to filter it in such a way where I can see what occurred before and after. So I could do where timestamp, um, between. Actually, do you have a better way if you want to try to do this, or I can just start from here?
We can just maybe even convert the time string to a string and look at it that way. Or yeah, well, we can do the in between. That's fine.
Yeah, let me think about how I'm doing this right now. So it'd be date time, right?
Yeah.
And I can set, let's do the next day. I think this might get me there. So what I'm gonna look at now, the timestamp's a little bit weird, but on this day, only 2 file events occurred, which is kind of interesting. And what I see here, right, is about, I don't know, 40-ish seconds after this file was clicked or was downloaded, this new weird file came up and it has this huge path here, this hash, cleartemp.ps1. Oh, look, it looks like it appeared from Excel. So this might
Right.
have actually, you know, been created onto this uh, file from the Excel application. So that could lend us a clue that maybe the user actually opened the file and did something and interacted with it.
So what I'm reading here is that, the user used Chrome to download a large order Excel file, and then
Yep.
shortly after we see the Excel process spawning this whatever this PS1, this PowerShell script is.
Yeah. So you have use Chrome, and then Excel is used to download, create this clear temp.x1 PowerShell script. So, going back to this, you have clear temp.ps1, which, we don't know what it is yet. If we had a copy of that later down the line, we can take a look. But a PS1 file, right, is a PowerShell script file that, if run, it executes a certain number of commands that can be run on a system. What's even weirder, in my eyes, is that it's put in this path called public videos clear temp. So normally, I don't even think that it's kind of suspicious to me that it's in a path like this, right?
Yeah,
It's not somewhere where a user would normally put files or have files created.
right. Especially not after they download a weird file, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of coincidences happening all at the
Hmm.
same time. You mentioned the use of virus total earlier. Since we have a hash, would it be wise to look that up
Yeah,
also?
definitely, because we only have one other event here, and a lot of times, if you have multiples of hashes, it may be worth taking a look. So you're right. So I'll take this hash. I'm just going to make sure I log it down first. I'm going to make sure I follow that investigation so I don't lose that. Right? Move that over here. Now what I'm going to do is take a look at this hash.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
It's actually on virus total.
yep. 31 out of 59 flags it as malicious. You have a bunch of things you can tell from here, Trojan dropper, etc. Let's take a look at some other details, right? You have some of this information here that's going to tell us when it was first seen in the wild, so it's been around for a long time. There's a lot of things you can do here, like you can look at the IP address and other behaviors. However, one thing we can just note is that it's bad. And look, we have some information here that says it's related to this Fin7 dice loader. There's some blogs that are referencing this indicator, etc. If you do some investigations onto this, use the internet to look at what all this means, you'll find that it's actually related to a threat actor group that's publicly reported as Fin7. But knowing now you have the threat, knowing you have malicious file on a system, you can use that to take a look and continue on from the employee. Is there anything else you wanted to do before we move on to that?
No, I think this is a great point to, like you said,
Yeah,
investigate, what this PowerShell file and XLS file might have done on the computer in
yeah,
processes.
definitely. So at the same time, right, you have the same thing you can do here with process events. You want to take the time the file was created and take a look at the host. And you can also, you already see, if as you see here, like if I change it by the timestamp, what I see already is this clear temp that we just looked at, and the hash, although I'm just eyeballing it, looks the same. Now we already know this is bad, so now we can take a clear focus on this and see what comes out of this one. So now we have these two command lines. This one is kind of it looks like it's just running this PowerShell script, but this one is pretty in depth. We have to take a quicker look at this. But before I do that, I just want to check everything else, look like I'm not missing anything. But now if I take a look at this, right, we have command.exe that's doing some commands to run actually PowerShell. And some of these flags, I mean, you can look up the Microsoft documentation to know what it means for PowerShell, but you have some things like non-interactive, some execution, and then you have like bypass to bypass some of the like security policies. And then it's running a different file. So there's this weird file in a share, like an admin share, and then there's another PowerShell file here. So that's something that we want to take a look into. This is
Right.
another file of interest for us. But just going through that, right, we've already found the malicious activity that's related on John Garcia's computer, and now we have different pivot points.
And
So
imagine nowadays we can even use ChatGTP. If I've never seen, a process like this before, I can just ask ChatGTP or some other AI platform to explain it to me.
yeah, definitely. So there's a lot we can do here from this investigation. We are moving on to that part. We've identified, if you're starting off as an analyst, you could have ended at Delphia Evans and said there's nothing else, but you were persistent and you move forward. You eventually find all of this evidence of malicious activity. All this stuff doesn't really fully fall on you. Hopefully not. You work in a team. This is where you would escalate now to another analyst, another investigator, where you work collaboratively to figure out what else happened.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe this is a good time to end here, right? And
Yeah.
if I can summarize what's going on. We received an alert, or we're warned about, suspicious activity happening on a user's computer who was Delphia Evans. We were able to find information about Delphia Evans. We identified that there were suspicious alerts that related to Delphia Evans, specifically that Delphia Evans reported a suspicious email. We figured out several ways that we could potentially pivot on the email that Delphia reported. When we pivoted on the sender, we found new links that were sent by the similar senders, but none of them seemed to have been clicked. So then we had to go back and pivot on the reply to address, which we used to find 31 links, and one of them was actually clicked. And when we looked at what happened, right, there was the user that clicked it downloaded a large order.xls file, and then that file dropped a PowerShell PS1 file that we saw. And when we look up that PS1 file in VirusTotal, we find that that it's actually malicious and it's related to Fin7,
Yeah.
potentially, right? Of course, some of these things are not always exact and it could be false positives or it could be misattribution. But I think this is a good place, to, hey, something actually bad happened. There's malicious stuff being executed on the user machine. You might think about quarantining, running your entire playbook and getting the rest of the team involved. But as an analyst, right, this is a really good opportunity to flex those analytical muscles. There's a lot of other things that you could potentially do here, right? There's a lot of other pivots that we noted above that you could go down all those rabbit holes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you captured it all perfectly, just summarizing it. And you have, for example, if you took really good notes, if you made a map like this, you have all of that information that backs it up. And one of the great things you can do with all this data, right, that this map that you just created, is you can make a separate timeline where you can run the whole thing in a more higher overview or high level sense, and you can package that and present that to your IT manager, to your executive management. There are a lot of times where the CISO or the CEO is going to request an update, or legal is going to request an update, and having this information already handy in whatever medium that works for you, and being able to build a timeline and explain that out is very helpful.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Wayman, and thank you so much for walking me through this exercise. This is one of multiple exercises that we have on the kc7cyber.com website. So if you go to kc7cyber.com/modules, and each of these are actually end-to-end entire intrusions. And so with every single one of these data sets, we give you questions that walk you through how you can look at the investigation. We hold your hand through it, but you can always go back and look through this investigation yourself. And just like women did today, you can use a mind map to map out, what is exactly happening in this one intrusion. And there's actually not just one intrusion. Each one of these actually has multiple different actors doing multiple intrusions. And these are, a chance to get very realistic skills, very realistic analysis skills that can apply to, a security operations center role, like an incident responder role, a threat hunter role, or even a threat intelligence analyst type role. So I encourage everyone at home, if you're trying to break into cybersecurity, if you're trying to improve your analytical skills, go through these modules. They're completely free and they give you great practical experience that you can actually put on your resume. Anything else you want to add, Women?
No, I think that sums everything up. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. See you, everyone.